Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 9 of my Witchwood card review. This time around, 4 new cards, including some class cards, and 1 neutral that's pretty interesting too. So if you don't have a lot of time, you just want to see the cards, of course, you can use the link in the description to skip to the end, see the reveals, see my 5-star ratings. But if you've got a little while, you want to hear me talk about these cards, let's go ahead and jump into my detailed reviews. Up first here we have the first of 2 new Hunter cards. This is the Duskhaven Hunter, a new 3-mana 2/5 with Stealth, and apparently it's a Worgen because it says each turn this is in your hand, swap its attack and health. So occasionally here you have a 2/5 with Stealth, and other times you have a 5/2 with Stealth. And unfortunately, I just don't think this minion's ever going to line up very well to find success in Hearthstone. So yes, a 5/2 minion with Stealth and Hunter could be pretty advantageous. Hunter likes doing damage. A 5/2 could hang around and hit face a couple times, perhaps, if it lines up exactly right on the right turn when your opponent doesn't have stuff to trade into it. But of course, 2 health, incredibly susceptible, so the likelihood that it gets to attack more than once is very slim, and honestly, they might be able to kill it even through stealth with AoE. So really, really hard to get this thing to attack as a 5/2. Now, on the other side of things, a 2/5 is a fine stat line for 3 mana. We've seen that before with cards like Carrion Grub, but Duskhaven Hunter is not a beast. And even with that stat line, those cards never found success before. There's no just vanilla 2/5 that sees play because 2 attack is a little weird. 3 is often much, much stronger as far as trading into things is concerned. 2 often just doesn't quite do it. Yes, it kills tokens here and there in Silverhand Recruits, but it doesn't kill that stuff in the turn 3, turn 4 range quite as successfully. So it having stealth wouldn't matter much. If it was a beast, once again, and you could play a stealth 2/5 3-drop into something like Houndmaster or Kill Command, and it was really important that it had stealth and that survivability to keep it on board, that might be awesome. But as it stands, not being a beast, it just doesn't help. Duskhaven Hunter doesn't work in either format. Now, on top of that, it's really inconsistent about what it's going to be in any given turn. You might need to play it one turn, and it's a 2/5 when you need the 5/2. So it's not really flexibility in my mind that it can swap. It's actually a bit more of a restriction or a punishment that it swaps. So to me, I mean, it's a fine minion. It's going to be okay in something like Arena, but it's just not doing enough or doing anything cool enough or strong enough or swingy enough to be a solid card in constructed format. So now let's move on to the Toxmonger here, the dude with the tiniest legs in Hearthstone compared to his upper body. I don't know what's going on there. His legs look so tiny to me in that artwork, though. This is another new Hunter minion, 4 mana this time around, and it's a 2/4, and it reads, whenever you play a 1-cost minion, give it Poisonous. So that's a pretty cool effect. You can really start to see instantly with cards like Stone Tusk Boar or Argent Squire, or most notably, I think, Elven Archer, a card which has been confirmed to work on the battle cry with Toxmonger. The battle cry is poisonous, and then, of course, the minion itself becomes poisonous on the board as well. So Elven Archer in particular, a super combo with Toxmonger for 2 cards to kill basically any minion without Divine Shield in the game. And that's pretty nifty. That's cool. That's a nice, efficient removal that could snowball over time into more removal. If you're able to stick more and more 1/1s, or you got multiple Elven Archers, like, yeah, there's potential there to do some cool stuff. That said, that doesn't necessarily make Toxmonger a playable card on its own, because playing 1-drops isn't something you typically love to do in a post-turn 4 environment. Like, yeah, to start the game, 1-drops are awesome. But as you get to turn 4, turn 5, turn 6, where you start to have enough mana to combo things out in a single turn with Toxmonger, you just don't want to be playing 1-drops. They're just so weak. Giving them Poisonous certainly helps because they can be problematic little guys that your opponent can't resolve. They can also just get pinged off too. They're just not that impactful. But the real problem is not their impact on the board or the immediacy or the risk of running low-cost stuff. It's that you run out of cards so fast when you play that many 1-drops. So in other words, to get enough cards to make Toxmonger worth it, you're going to have to include so many 1-drops in your deck that you're just never going to be able to refill your hand or keep up or do enough. And yes, theoretically, you could combine this card with something like Ravencaller to give yourself even more 1-cost shenanigans. But then you're running multiple bad cards. You're running so many bad cards that don't do anything without exactly Toxmonger, which makes your deck really inconsistent because you have to get everything exactly the right order, exactly the right time. You got to hold your Elven Archers until you get your Toxmonger. You got to hold your Stone Tusk Boar, and everything just falls apart. It doesn't work. Now, there's one option here that could make it work, because yet again we're going to talk about Quest Hunter. Somehow Quest Hunter keeps coming back up in this expansion, because in Quest Hunter maybe Toxmonger makes a little bit more sense, because you're not just running 1-drops for the sake that they're 1-drops, you're running them to empower your quest. So the downside of running them is much, 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 much smaller, because you're running them anyway. So Toxmonger is kind of like a free bonus in that environment as opposed to a punishment. So yeah, I guess if Quest Hunter works, maybe Toxmonger has a glimmer of hope for success. But I'll be honest, even in Quest Hunter, since this is just a 2/4 minion, and you can't really play it on curve as a 4-drop, it still looks like it's going to be too weak for even Quest Hunter to me. Like, I still don't think it's going to work. I don't think it adds up. So a lot of ways for this card to fall short, and only really one way for it maybe to find any play at all, and that way is a trap, I would argue, because Quest Hunter has never worked out so far. So unless Quest Hunter becomes like a tier 1 deck, you're not going to see Toxmonger at all. So now let's move on to the most confusing card in the entire set so far. This is Witching Hour. And the reason I say it's confusing is because it has this unbelievably awesome and dramatic and beautiful artwork. You've got this moon that seems to be just collapsing in on the earth, maybe getting ready to destroy this town. It's like the coolest visual ever, and it looks like some giant spell, some meteor style thing, just some cataclysmic, enormous, apocalyptic event. And then you read the text on this card, and it says, summon a random friendly beast that died this game. What? What? How does that match up to the artwork at all? Yes, there are some connections between moons and, werewolves / Worgens, full moons, spawning werewolves and stuff. But Worgens aren't beasts, so it still doesn't connect to the Witching Hour. And the Witching Hour is late at night, so there's a big scary moon out. That's fine, but I still don't know what that has to do with a beast. I thought it was going to be this just epic game-ending sort of spell, but instead we got this. And this is okay. It's not the worst card ever by any means. So for 3 mana, you get to summon a friendly beast that died this game. So it's sort of a Resurrect or Eternal Servitude kind of card in some ways. But specifically for a beast, which does give it some extra power. Yes, you can't use this in any given deck, but because you can narrow in and control the sort of card you're summoning, it gives Witching Hour some really interesting potential, because you can basically run only 1 or 2 beasts in your deck that you're going to be really happy to get back for 3 mana. So, for instance, a couple options that come to mind are things like Hadronox. You could run just 1 Hadronox in your deck, which is a beast, along with a bunch of other taunts, and suddenly you can bring back this insane Hadronox for 3 mana that's going to summon you a bajillion taunts and help you play an incredible late-game style deck with a lot more consistency and depth, and that's pretty cool. Alternatively, you could do things like Charged Devilsaur, where you play a charging 7/7 essentially, and it dies at some point in the game, and then you bring it back, or in fact you even bring 2 of them back for this just insane burst damage combo, because remember, they don't have rush. They can attack face if they're summoned and not played, so Witching Hour would allow them to attack instantly. You could even combo it with Savage Roar for like a 20 damage combo, where you do 14 from the minions and you do 6 from Savage Roar. That would be completely bonkers. It'd be a 3-card combo essentially that would require some setup, obviously, but it could still be the sort of things that wins you games. And of course, Druid is pretty good normally in a late game combo-oriented sort of way, because they have so much survivability. Now that said, there is one downside for a card like Witching Hour, and that is that things like Malfurion the Pestilent and Spreading Plague both summon beasts. So those are 2 of your most defensive cards in Druid, 2 of the things that absolutely are mandatory to stay alive against aggressive decks right now for Druid if you're playing a slower style. So you can't really run them with Witching Hour, because you're just going to get a bunch of 1/5 Scarab taunts in your Witching Hour pool, and the likelihood that you get some awesome minion out is so darn low. Now, is summoning a 1/5 taunt for 3 mana terrible? No, not terrible necessarily, but not something you'd want to do or build your deck around. So Witching Hour is a little bit stretched thin there, just because I think the slower style of play that would really support this card is threatened by the fact that you have to run these other really powerful anti-aggro tools in Druid. So then I say, well, maybe this is a Beast Druid card that you run in more of a mid-rangey Beast deck where, you're just running 4, 5, 6 mana Beasts that are really strong and powerful, or big taunts or something. And Witching Hour could just be another way to summon minions, get some mid-sized thing out at a couple mana discount. And sure, that's okay, but I still don't think that's a big enough play, a swinging enough play, a strong enough play compared to the things like Big Priest could do, for instance. Nothing like an Eternal Servitude out of Witching Hour that I can envision in that scenario. So, yeah, maybe you could use this with Barns and Wild format moving forward. It would be cool to build a big Druid, kind of exactly like old Big Priest was with Barns. Otherwise, some combo potential, but it's going to be hard to make everything fit together. So, I don't hate this card by any means. Clearly, it can do, summon some big old stuff, some big scary things for 3 mana, and that's inherently good. That's cheap. That's very efficient. That's a high-tempo play. The kind of thing that can be successful in Hearthstone. But I don't yet see a home for it. I don't see how it's going to work quite yet. So now let's talk about one last card here. This is the Witchwood Grizzly. And I love this artwork. This ghostly grizzly bear is awesome looking. This is a new neutral beast, a 5-mana 3/12. Pretty crazy stat line. It has Taunt and a battle cry that reads, lose 1 health for each card in your opponent's hand. So looking at this card at a surface level, obviously if you could play it as a 3/12, that would be an enormously overstatted 5-mana taunt compared to something like Fin Creeper, the classic set taunt minion at 5 mana with 3 attack. It is merely a 3/6. Sinjin Shieldmaster, a 3/5 at 4 mana, another comparable, somewhat playable card. And of course Tar Creeper at 3 mana, also a 3/5 technically on defense as well. So you can get a lot of extra health here for a couple extra mana points if it works out perfectly. But, of course, on turn 5, even in a super anti-aggro matchup, your opponent will typically have, 2 to 3 cards left. Sometimes could still even have 4 or 5 left, depending on what they've played. So I think instead of this being a 3/12 when played from your hand, most of the time it's probably looking like more of a 3/9 or a 3/8. Maybe if you're playing in a control versus control matchup, it's like a 3/6, 3/5. It's pretty easy. It could even be a 3/3, right? Like, they could even have 10 cards, I guess, technically. So it could be a 3/2. So I think really quickly you have to identify that this card is best, of course, in a defensive deck that's looking to stomp out aggro decks, not in a defensive control deck that's probably going for the long game as a value deck against other value decks. This one would fall short pretty quickly and be a kind of throwaway mid-range minion that wouldn't contribute quite enough. So I guess the question becomes, is like a 3/8 or a 3/9 good enough against aggro? And yeah, maybe. Of course, Voidlord's a 3/9 that gets played around turn 5 or 6 a lot in Hearthstone these days. It's pretty good at shitting out aggro, but of course it also has the Death Rattle built in. Both of these would be equally susceptible to silence. Witchwood Grizzly, not as good as a Voidlord sort of play most of the time, but it can be run by everybody. So that flexibility across classes means, yeah, maybe it'll find a home. It's also going to be the kind of thing that's occasionally really good out of Stonehill Defender. Could be played in beast decks, like, for instance, Hunter and Druid could find ways to work with this thing as well. And, of course, Taunt Warrior, if that really does become a thing, an odd Taunt Warrior deck, then Witchwood Grizzly would fit into that pretty darn well, too. Now, I do think since this is only like a 3/8, 3/9 most of the time, it's not really that much better than something like a Fin Creeper. And it does have that downside. So I don't think this card's going to be seen everywhere. A lot of people are like giving this thing 5 stars, 4 stars. I don't go quite that far with Witchwood Grizzly. I think the lack of consistency is an issue. I don't think every deck's going to run it. I think it's a great inclusion for Stonehill Defender. Once again, that's fine. But only select decks that can really utilize some aspect of this. In other words, the beast aspect, or maybe cheating this out by recruit with things like Master Oakheart, for instance, or resummoning it with something like Hadronox, although, of course, that's not going to be a consistent play either. Some way to build on the specific aspects of this, where you don't have to rely on the battle cry, and your deck benefits from the taunt or the beast nature of it, or even the 3-attack nature. On its own, in other words, it's just not going to get there, but in combination with other assets, other synergies, other tools, maybe it could fit. Maybe it could find a home, because it does do some pretty interesting things. I don't think this, once again, is your, Sludge Belcher replacement of old, that anti-aggro 5-mana taunt card. I don't think this gets there. Just a little bit too inconsistent to be run across a variety of decks, but still fine, still workable, a good card to exist in Hearthstone. And there you go, those are my detailed reviews for these 4 cards. Now let's go ahead and jump right into the quick reviews where I rate each of these from 1 to 5 stars. Duskhaven Hunter is a 2-star card. Toxmonger is a 2-star card. Witching Hour is a 3-star card. Witchwood Grizzly is a 3-star card. Okay, guys, part 9 of my Witchwood card review is done. Man, almost to part 10. That's crazy. So what did you guys think about these cards? Were the Hunter cards better than I gave them credit for? Is Witching Hour ever going to work? And can you explain the artwork to me? Is Witchwood Grizzly the answer to all of our aggro prayers? I don't know. You can let me know in the comments below. What do you think? What were your take on these cards? I love hearing what you guys have to say. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.